So, how in the world did some of Hitler's top scientists, the very people who designed weapons used against the Allies, end up working for the United States right after World War II? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a spy movie, but this was a real top secret government program. Let's dive into this really dark and complicated story. It's all about national security, moral compromise, and a desperate race for power.
And we're not talking about a small, quiet operation here. This was huge. We're talking more than 1,600 specialists, experts in things like rocketry, chemical weapons, you name it, all secretly brought over to America. On the surface, it was given a pretty clean, benign public face. But underneath was a whole lot of secrets and lies.
Okay, so to really get our heads around how this all happened, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at what Operation Paperclip actually was. Then, we'll get into the whole Cold War justification behind it. After that, we're going to have to face the deep moral compromises that were made, the secrecy that surrounded the whole thing, and its really complicated legacy. And finally, we'll end with the big question that still hangs over this story today.
Right, so what exactly was Operation Paperclip? Well, to answer that, you have to picture the scene right at the end of the war. Everything is in chaos, the world is in ruins, and the future of who would be the next global power was completely up for grabs. So officially, Operation Paperclip was a U.S. intelligence program. It was run by a special agency set up just for this kind of thing, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency. And its mission? Well, its mission was brutally simple. Find Germany's best and brightest scientists and put them to work for America. And this is the key part, pretty much turn a blind eye to whatever they did during the war. And if you look at how the program evolved, you can see what it was really all about. It actually started with a different name, Operation Overcast. The official reason was to use German science to help finish the war with Japan. But then, when that war ended pretty suddenly in August 1945, the program didn't stop. Nope. It got bigger. It was eventually renamed Operation Paperclip, and that name has a pretty sneaky meaning we'll get to in a minute, which signaled a much, much bigger long-term goal. And that long-term strategic goal? Oh, that was all about the next big conflict, the Cold War. As soon as that wartime alliance with the Soviet Union started to crumble, a new, incredibly high-stakes race for technological dominance kicked off. The goals were, let's be honest, brutally pragmatic. Number one, get a scientific leg up on the Soviets, who were doing the exact same thing, trying to recruit German experts. Number two, make sure Moscow couldn't get those same experts. You see, the US was way behind Germany in rocket technology, maybe 20 years behind, and this was seen as a shortcut, a way to catch up fast and save a ton of money on R&D. This was all about gearing up for what many at the Pentagon saw as an unavoidable total war with the Soviet Union. And this quote right here, it just perfectly sums up the thinking of the time. The argument was pretty straightforward. It was the lesser of two evils. National security trumped everything, and the fear of these brilliant scientists working for the enemy, well, that overrode just about every other concern. It was a race, pure and simple, and America was going to win it. And it is so important to remember, the US was not doing this in a vacuum. The Soviet Union actually recruited an even larger number of German specialists. The real difference was in the strategy. The Soviets tended to just extract all the knowledge they could and then kind of cast the experts aside, but the US integrated them deep into its military-industrial complex for the long haul, and ultimately that turned out to be the more effective approach. But, and this is a huge but, winning that race came at a very steep moral price. This is where the story really takes a dark turn, where we have to look at the massive compromises that were made in the name of national security and progress.
I mean, just look at this. This official memo lays it all out in black and white. Project Paperclip had two crystal clear aims: to exploit German scientists for American research and to deny these intellectual resources to the Soviet Union. There is no mention of justice or accountability or what these scientists did in their past. It was just a cold, strategic calculation.
So who were these men? Well, about half of them were members of the Nazi Party. A smaller group, but still a significant one, were die-hard Nazis, even members of the infamous SS. Now, U.S. law at the time forbade immigrating people like that, so intelligence officers got creative. They came up with a little workaround. For the files of the men with the most damning histories, they'd simply attach a paperclip. Those files were then set aside, their records basically scrubbed clean, to guarantee they could get into America. And that is how the program got its name. And the cost of their work back in Germany, it was just staggering. In the underground factory where Wernher von Braun's V-2 rockets were built, More than 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died. They died from starvation, disease, and flat-out execution. These were the weapons and the methods that America was now so eager to import.
Now, a moral compromise this big, it absolutely required secrecy. The government knew, they knew that if the whole truth got out, the public backlash would be enormous.
So the program really had two different faces. For the public, the War Department pushed this very sanitized story about the good Germans who were helping America with totally harmless tech. They'd even set up press events with scientists showing off parachutes. But the classified reality, the truth, was that these very same men were developing the next generation of rockets and chemical weapons for the US military.
And they were absolutely right to be worried about what the public would think. When news about the plan to bring over even more scientists leaked out, a Gallup poll showed that most Americans thought it was a bad idea. This program could really only survive by staying in the shadows. You know, the opposition wasn't just coming from the general public, it came from some of America's own top scientists. Hans Bay, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who had actually fled Nazi Germany himself, he asked this simple but incredibly powerful question. Do we want science at any price? And that question, it just cuts right to the heart of this entire moral debate. So now, all these decades later, we're left with this legacy, and it is a tangled mess of incredible technological achievements and just profound moral burdens.
I mean, on the one hand, you have these unbelievable breakthroughs. The paperclip scientists were absolutely essential to creating the Saturn V rocket that took us to the moon. They helped make huge leaps in jet engine technology. One of them even invented the ear thermometer. But on the other hand, all of that success was built on whitewashed pasts, on compromised ethics, and on a complete failure of historical accountability. And there is no single person who embodies this contradiction better than Wernher von Braun. Here's a guy who was a former SS officer, whose rocket program was literally built with slave labor, and he was transformed into an American hero. He was on magazine covers, he was in Disney specials about space, he became a director at NASA, he was the mastermind behind the Apollo moon landing. A genius, yes, but a man with a very, very dark past that was conveniently swept under the rug. And all of that brings us right back to the central dilemma of Operation Paperclip, a question that honestly is just as relevant today as it was back in 1945. So what do you think? Was it a necessary evil, a pragmatic choice when facing down the Soviet Union? Or was it an unforgivable moral compromise, one that kind of stained America's victory in the war? The story of Operation Paperclip really leaves us with this tough question. When a nation's security is on the line, where do you draw the line on morality? It's a question with no easy answers. Not then,